glasses. Anyway, in the top left, actually playing Protoss, guys. He is the red Protoss for BIG ShoWTimE.
And the bottom right in the blue, he's playing for the Rebellion. He's your captain. It's Harstem.
A lot of people's captains, yeah. Very popular dude. I mean, he was always popular because he was just so easygoing and charming and very fun player to watch his career develop, and then it just kind of went to a new level when he started doing content creation. ShoWTimE, I feel like, was also was and is very likable, but obviously hasn't gotten to the content creation side. Although he does stream a decent amount when he's not in any particularly big tournament, so there is that. But both of them were really solid and are really solid Protosses. You know, we expect macro from them to an extent, I guess, and well, the other matchups, yes, PvP, well, it's PvP, so, you know, anything can happen, right? But I think we do think of them as the sometimes honorable Protoss. And maybe not so honorable in PvP because it is the matchup that needs to have a lot of backstabs.
Well, you say, you know, matchup, a lot of backstabs is aggressive matchup. I don't know if that's as true anymore. Yeah, you know, you have these 3-gate robos, sure, fine. The Harstem skillless matchup yesterday was kind of a banger, part because of this aggression. But the changes to the Sentry Zombie Grub, they've actually, it feels like if you want to play a solid game, it feels like they've stabilized a lot. That bonus damage to shields is actually doing a ton for the matchup.
Yeah, that is always interesting to watch develop. I think that the aggression will probably always exist, just because there's also that chance that you just simply do not scout it, or the contain can happen to give you that lead with the faster Nexus or whatever it is, right? We have also seen, you know, I don't know about the new map pool, but we were seeing a lot of, for instance, ShoWTimE versus Max Packs being just, I mean, the games for some is over quick, but they were also really questionable. You and I cast that last season. And they were very, very macro, but especially in a best of 5, you're going to have to really mix things up. And we already have a bit of a mix-up with ShoWTimE. Going for that Stargate first and foremost, delaying his Nexus.
You know, part of it, obviously, with the Stargate, you're delaying your Nexus. Part of it is that Harstem is also delaying your Nexus, so it's not going to be that big of it. In fact, both players, because you got to stay a little bit safe, their Nexus are going to go down right around the same time. All that gas that ShoWTimE's spending on a Stargate and probably an Oracle or two, well, it's 3 sentries for Harstem, and that gives him a ton of map vision. But also, the weird thing about this, and yes, he's got a probe on the map, and maybe he's going to practice something. This might just be for a rescout. The weird thing about this, between the fact that sentries now don't really die to oracles, and with their bonus damage to shields, 3 sentries in a stalker handle oracles really well. The shields go down immediately. The stalker can start to plink away at the scant little tiny bit of hole that an oracle has, and it actually can work out pretty well for the sentry player. Now the question though is, Harstem's got his natural on the way. He did chrono that warp gate. That was done a little bit faster. And there is a pylon, I think, on the map on the bottom side. Yeah, getting ready for that one. Stalker's on the ways. What exactly does Harstem go for? And for now,
what?
2-gate pressure?
Oh. I was like, why is he building the second star? Oh my god, it's crazy. No, this is the fastest building wall, as he dedicates solely and completely to being on the opposite side of the map. He didn't want to deal with the adepts at all. Still kind of funny though. He does cancel it. Hallucination, very interesting idea. Force field coming down, and this is not gonna. It really looks like it's gonna work, honestly. Those stalkers, the hallucinations, have tanked quite a bit. Shield battery was taken down first, but it looks like maybe Harstem won't have the staying power. Yeah, but there's more warp-ins, but the probes are allowed to get in on the action with the army, so that was a little more awkward. Harstem's reinforcements are finally on the way after the slow warp-in. The shield battery does finally complete on the backside, and that should save ShoWTimE's life.
Yeah, it should. It's weird as well. It's kind of funny. You look at this. ShoWTimE dives in with the oracles. He's got 2 of them. He dives right on top of the oracles. That's a problem. In the last patch, those oracles would have been dead in like 2.5 seconds less. This time they last a lot longer. That gives Harstem that much more DPS on the rest of the army. And well, Harstem, while he hasn't won this game, he has committed. He has removed a lot of the tech that ShoWTimE's been going for. He goes Stargate. The goal is to get damage on your opponent, have some map control, and he's still going to try to dive on top of this with no shield battery energy available. Do we have an overcharge?
No. I think he wins. I think he just won. ShoWTimE could not get enough units, so that's even with the shield battery overcharge. Like, okay, that did save his life for a little bit. You know, some 2 and 3 shots were still happening. And so Harstem, even with slow warp-ins off of only 2 gateways, I mean, he has done a lot here. It looks like he will not straight up win the game, but it gets very dangerous when the number of stalkers gets that unequal. ShoWTimE will hold on. He is down 3 workers. He doesn't have a substantial lead on that blink. And he did lose the oracles, which really the potential is endless with the oracles being alive, stasis traps revelation, as well as more probe damage. Well, now they're dead, so kind of sucky on that part. But right now, biggest concern for ShoWTimE, he is down a couple of workers. He doesn't exactly know. He hasn't gotten to the other side of the map to see what Harstem is doing, so that might be even a big concern if he's wary of, for instance, like DTs coming out. But not going to be so. Harstem, obviously just finishing up Blink, has his own Robo. That's quite safe of him, actually, since he doesn't really use it just for an observer. And then the third Nexus comes down for him, too. So I still say that got really dicey. More dicier than I was anticipating. Once that shield battery, the second one came in, I was like, okay, this should do the trick, right? And then Harstem realized he was still winning the gun battle. But not enough, though. Not enough to so get an easy first game victory.
No, not really, but it was fun. I was looking at that, I'm like, wait, what? He's attacking with 2 gate. Like, what is happening here? But it was light pressure, I guess, that turned into a whole lot more. Now, Blink's done on both sides, and at this point, ShoWTimE is currently suffering from a slight deficit in tech. Yeah, he's got the Stargate, but Robo is not there. Harstem can add warp prisms or observers or immortals, or right now just observers to see what's happening. But while we talk about this tech deficit, right? Immortals or warp prisms or whatever it is that Harstem wants to make out of the Robo, if he decides to make that happen, it is going to be a slightly faster +1 for ShoWTimE in like 2 minutes. So ShoWTimE, he's got his third base up faster. He's got a couple more probes now because Chrono on 3 base is a lot better than Chrono on 2 base. But he still has to deal with this attack coming out of Harstem. And he's up double the army supply zombie grub. Yeah, ShoWTimE got his third base up. Yeah, in like 2.5 minutes and a minute and a half, he's going to have this +1. But this is a lot of stalkers versus not nearly as many stalkers, and overcharge is just about done.
He also misclicked and shot his own stalker, right? Like, I didn't see that. ShoWTimE clearly under too much pressure. So many weakened stalkers, so few stalkers. And it looks like Harstem will just be able to snowball. At the end of the day, he was, from the get-go, ahead on those stalkers. He dedicated to the stalker production. He continued dedicating to the stalker production while still holding on to a fair economy, and then just kept on doing it. 4 gateways versus 3, by the way, at the end there. Harstem very much planning on trying to really pressure that third base. And this is also where those oracles dying was also a problem, because the revelation could have gone on the observer to get rid of some of the insight that Harstem would have had to confirm that he could push that third as much as he did. A stasis trap or 2 can be huge, especially when you get rid of the observer first and they can't see it. And not saying that would have saved his life, but those are kind of the ideas to use the oracles indefinitely if you go for them. So they can be really, really powerful, or they can kind of suck because they die, and then that's it, right? And so we do have, I think, even some Protosses, professional Protosses, really with different opinions, of what is the superior opener. And I think ShoWTimE has been on the side of Oracle still being pretty freaking good. But, it kind of showed the weakness there. They weren't as helpful on the defense of some dedicated aggression, shall we say. And then they're dead. They're not helping you for the further battles either. Kind of not a great start for ShoWTimE.
So some regard, it's funny. We spent, or at least I started talking in the early game. I'm like, yeah, it feels like Protoss PvP is becoming a little more stable. The sentry change, you can't burst them down. They're nice, solid defensive units. And then Harstem's like, yeah, what they also allow me to do? They also allow me to get aggressive off 2 gateways, which is, we see 3 gate happen a lot. Sometimes there's a 4 gate, crazy aggression. Sure, fine. When was the last time you saw 2 gate aggression in a PvP?
I mean, it doesn't happen all that often, but it certainly does happen because there is that trick. I mean, that's the other trick that Protoss can do besides, where their chrono goes, how their gases are actually saturated, and what technology they're able to hide. The other thing in this matchup is just, are you actually producing? because there are gaps in production in this matchup if you're doing other builds. So it can happen. I think ShoWTimE was at least somewhat wary of it because he had a shield battery on the way, and then obviously when it happened, he was making sure to get a second one. But that might have been really what was the ticket there, was that first shield battery didn't complete, and those stalkers were force-footed off. The probes were force-footed off too, and their addition to the first defense would have been really quite helpful. And now we get into game number 2. So let's talk about Ghost River. In the top left, we do have Harstem.
And they have a right looking to wall, maybe a little bit stronger, looking to show us what he can do. He's down a game. It's ShoWTimE.
So history-wise, we do have ShoWTimE kind of in the lead as far as most recent history goes. But overall, I guess, also like career-wise, ShoWTimE is the general winner and often is even very favored. But most recently, the year of 2024, it is ShoWTimE favored, but there is a 1-4 in Harstem's favor. So he had at least one really good best of 7, and their last best of 5 was very, very contested. So yeah, overall, ShoWTimE usually wins against Harstem, but not maybe so decisively in the last year. And then additionally, it really feels like Harstem has got some serious momentum.
He does. And it's funny as well, you talk about momentum. Form is not necessarily the best metric because, you know, if I'm Harstem and I'm playing in EPT Cups, for example, I'm playing a lot of Protoss that realistically you would never expect him to lose to. So the fact that he would 2-0 that matchup does make the number a little bit off. That being said, last month Harstem's PvP has been better than ShoWTimE's. 68% versus 64%. Is it a big difference? No, but it does add credence to what you're saying. Harstem has a lot of momentum. Taking down Skillous like he did in that series was awesome, was a great series. And now he's shown us that not only is he willing to get aggressive in that ShoWTimE series, or in the Skillous series, not only is he willing to play macro games, but he's willing to get aggressive off macro games and play macro off aggressive games, like what we saw in game 1.
And I do think that 4% difference has a little more credibility than a lot of other times, in which case you might be talking about players from different scenes. So you're like, oh, well, I mean, what does that mean? But, you know, these guys, they're facing similar Protoss, you know, European regions covered with them. So they get thoroughly tested. There's a lot of data, I think, for that. And yeah, it might actually be a sign that Harstem is improving a little bit better, or doing a little bit better. Very recently, but we do expect ShoWTimE to be more of that consistent Protoss in the European region. You know, it's MaxPax obviously when he plays online, but then it's ShoWTimE, and then Harstem hasn't been in the conversation as far as the heavy hitter Protosses. You know, he's like, yeah, he definitely do well, and you know, PvPs can go so many different directions, especially when there's like 12 Protoss in the playoffs or the European regionals in general. But Harstem, I mean, you know, we have a lot of Protosses, I guess, not just Harstem, are really person maybe thinking, okay, I want to be top 3, and then obviously I want to take down the second guy, which is ShoWTimE, and then I want to take down the first guy, which is MaxPax, which does occasionally happen. MaxPax is very good at PvP, but does occasionally lose it. But we got ourselves a real macro game from Harstem. Good lord. He asked me, how often do you see 2-gate aggression? And I said, you know, it does happen. I don't often see a third Nexus in PvP before the natural is finished.
Yeah, and I'm sitting here like, so Harstem opens Robo, we see a Twilight out of ShoWTimE, and I was about to say, you know, Zombie tell me about this Robo thing, because we didn't used to see it as much, and now we really are. And I think the answer to the question is, well, I can get a lot of Immortals out, and that allows me to defend this third base a little bit more. But the Immortal's not out yet. ShoWTimE does have a decent amount of army on the map, but I guess for right now, he's not really gonna attack before Blink is done. And if Harstem can get up to like 3 or 4 Immortals by the time that Blink is done, if you're just trying to play this defensive style, you don't want to have map control, you don't want to have agency on the map. You're just like, look, I got my 3rd Nexus very quickly, I only have to defend this Robo opening's great. 3-4 Immortals, yeah, Blink Stalkers are mobile, Zombie Grub, but take a straight up fight against that number of Immortals, it gets really hard.
It does. There's kind of 2 things I feel are important to talk about. One, maybe less important, but there is a possibility in some PvPs that the third Nexus actually would have been scouted kind of late. If ShoWTimE is trying to be really fancy with some stalker pressure on the natural or something, like there's actually a possibility. Obviously not in this game. Hallucinations abound. Units were heading towards the third base, blah, blah, blah. But then the second thing, most important thing, is there's something to be said about getting greed as fast as possible. The faster you can get the greed, the faster you can set up to defend the greed, basically. It also means the most vulnerable you are in case the other player is being super aggressive. But if you're expecting a middle-of-the-road player, which ShoWTimE can often be, then extreme greed can be very good. So can extreme aggression, but extreme greed in this case. And so ShoWTimE, he doesn't have anything that really takes care of this. Usually faster blink builds instead of the robo that ShoWTimE went for that blink, usually get you map control. So you can say, oh, well, I can get a third base faster, or I can get a safer third base, or whatever it is. Well, not if the other guy's third base is already done. And then you're just like, well, all right, now I'm actually playing catch up, which is exactly what has happened. ShoWTimE not been able to try to use his blink stalkers to do anything really to go against Harstem. Now the game that this folds into is going to be kind of a classico, right? Which is a Mortal Charge Archon as the composition for Harstem, definitely. And then ShoWTimE has maybe a little more decision making, but that is a classic composition. And what we've seen in the development of PvP is that blink stalkers do still work out against the composition, even if it gets to the point that it wants to. Because that's kind of the conundrum, is like, okay, if it gets to mass Immortal Charge Archon, can stalkers hold up against that? And the question has kind of been answered over the last, 3-4 years, that it's like, yes, but only if you're really active, only if you're really good, only if you're really in tune with PvP, and probably only if you also add on your own Charge Archon, which is exactly what ShoWTimE's doing. But this is what Blink Stalkers is supposed to do: run around, get some bases, pick off some units, slow down an attack, and ShoWTimE is finally getting on that.
Yeah, and I really like what we're seeing Harstem do as well, right? Twilight is very delayed compared to what ShoWTimE's going for. And it'd be tempting to say, well, I like Blink. Blink is good. It gives me mobility. Great, fine. If you go Blink out of a bunch of Immortals here, your Blink is going to be very far delayed. Your tech is just not going to be there. But Charge Lot Immortal against Stalkers in a straight-up fight, I know we were talking about, okay, well, you can play around the map, and you can have this map control, and you have to be super active. Well, in a straight-up fight, Immortal Charge Lot against a bunch of Stalkers, it was heavily in favor of the Immortal Charge Lot player, and that's what Harstem's going for. Yeah, there's a fourth base on the way, but he's trying to take advantage of this timing right now. +1's done. Charge is done. He's got 4 Immortals in this army. And this is where it gets a little scary for ShoWTimE. If he's forced back home, going into this ramp for Harstem is going to be a little scary, so he's just going to knock the rocks down for now, make it a little bit more wide open, because again, we do have those sentries. Force fields are going to be a thing. But again, this is the timing Harstem's looking for, when his army is that much better. There's 1 Archon on the map, Zombie Grab, but 1 Archon, you need a couple more. And okay, I guess ShoWTimE's got 2. Maybe you want a couple more. Yeah, he's got 2.
He was actually fast with the Templar Archives, which is really important because he knows how many minerals are going into the charge lot production for ShoWTimE. But that said, I actually think that ShoWTimE has done a really great job reading into this and kind of playing catch up to a degree, but then doing it only 1 step behind, if that half a step, I guess. So half a step behind, well, obviously Shield Battery Overcharge is going to be absolutely huge. Concave versus convex is going to be really big, and ShoWTimE knows that. So he is setting up very defensively, matching the pace and matching the movement of Harstem's army, all while building his own equal army, basically. But he has a couple of Stalkers that can maybe go after the Warp Prism or do some better micro, pop in the Immortal Shields. So ShoWTimE, I think, has done this really well, and Harstem has actually realized, as he should, this isn't going to work. And he's even down 30 army supply, so he's really got to get out of here.
That's so sick. Look at that. Harstem, he hallucinates a Warp Prism to bait the blink on forward from ShoWTimE to try to get that good fight. Even still, I mean, this army from ShoWTimE is massive. Immortals now at the front line is not where they want to be. Second Warp Prism, the real one's going to go down, and even though it was super sick from Harstem to try to bait that out, ShoWTimE, he jumps on top anyways. Harstem is dead in this game number 2.
Yeah.
And it was super cool. Unfortunately, it just means Harstem is still super dead.
Yeah. I think he also was hoping that ShoWTimE really wasn't going to chase after him 100%, and that the Warp Prism could threaten a fake run by or drop to buy a little more time. But it did immediately go down, and even though the blink forward puts those Stalkers in a vulnerable area against the Immortals, if they have 20 charge lots right behind them, like, that doesn't matter as much. So again, I think ShoWTimE really played that quite well. Like Harstem tried to do something that I think was really supposed to offset the opponent. The opponent was supposed to maybe see it a little bit later and then go, hey, what the heck? Third base, what are you doing? Okay, well, I have to worry about what you could be doing from that. All right, maybe I'll try and go for a lot of stalkers, then I'll try and really pressure you. Oh, shoot, you managed to defend that. Now I'm the one that's behind, you know? And ShoWTimE didn't get baited into trying to be super aggressive. He made more stalkers, obviously. He got Blink, which was not something that Harstem bothered to afford. But he didn't really dedicate to it. He did focus on, I think, the better things, which is getting his own bases up, getting his own probes up, and getting his own identical army, but obviously with defender's advantage. And he did that very well. So I think that's it's kind of like when a person goes for a gold base, I feel like, you know, where the gold base can provide either a lot of aggression or even maybe a lot of macro, depending on what type of game it is. And one of the trickiest things about it is the bait, getting the other guy to go like, oh, you can't get away with the gold base. I got to do something. Ah. And then they can't, you know. Cyril builds an impenetrable wall versus Dark, and you're like, oh, okay. And I feel like it's kind of what happens when you take an absurdly fast third base, is that you're kind of hoping to bait a middle-of-the-road player into doing something kind of silly. And ShoWTimE just didn't play that silly.
Yeah, a lot of confidence. It's like, look, I'm gonna max out eventually, and I favor myself in the late game, is I think a fair way to approach it. What I think was also kind of cool, we didn't get a chance to see it. We did see it in the Skilla series later. And I think this is where Harstem was going in this style, this robo first that he goes for, mass charge loud immortal. If it doesn't really work, or if the game goes a little later, he transitions into a robo bay, second robo, and you're like, okay, well, this would be disruptive. No. He goes up to like 4 Colossus, and then all of a sudden the counter to his counter gets handled quite a bit. I don't know if this was going to be disruptors or Colossus. In this last game, he certainly was getting himself set up for either one. But as this series goes on, as we probably get some eventually, some even longer games than that, it's something that it's worth paying attention to, because again, Colossus, we talk about things we generally see and don't see in the matchup. Colossus are something that we generally don't see. But for now, Crimson Court is game 3.
All right, Crimson Court. Top right, we do have Harstem for Shopify Rebellion.
Bottom left, in the red for Berlin International Gaming. He's tied up in the series now in the red. Is ShoWTimE.
I think you're right too. Colossus have seemed to, they've become like a trickle. Yeah, over the last few years. In fact, I remember in Valencia actually, we seeing it was Neeb, one of Neeb's last really close, great best ofs in which he was maybe going to advance as the only foreigner, and I think he was going for Colossus. Yeah, if I remember correctly. But, you know, that stands out in my mind because it was really nice, and there was the story of the, you know, the last remaining non-Korean and blah, 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 but also because Colossus. And so we see that sprinkled around PvP. I am always indecisive about how much I like Colossus in this matchup. So it would have been really interesting to see Harstem be able to flesh out that robotics bay, regardless of what it is. Because either way, it's a good idea. If you are the one pressuring, let's say that ShoWTimE really did mess up on the beats of that last game. You know, again, he makes too many stalkers, doesn't do any damage, it's later to the third, later to the fourth, and then it's all kind of awkward. And he doesn't feel confident defending or attacking after defending. Then Harstem just has kind of a contain, and then Colossus and Disruptors gone to the front line is much more powerful. We didn't see that. ShoWTimE had played such a nice game in reaction/comparison to Harstem's that he was very confident that he had bought enough time, bought enough charge lots to run after Harstem. So we might see the robotics bay actually used in this best of 5 for maybe some disruptor wars. But it's also felt like a little while since I've seen true mass soccer disruptor wars, you know? I want that classic PvP back.
Yeah, Blink Stalker Disruptor is probably my favorite style of PvP. It's fun. It's certainly not fun to play. If you're a Protoss player, we've heard complaints, but as a viewer, I love to watch it. It's really a lot of fun. But when we talk about that last game, is it going to be Disruptors? Is it going to be Colossus? Where do we go in this setup? The other thing that's a bit of a problem for Harstem, now not a massive problem, but a bit of a problem, is that game he played on Ghost River against ShoWTimE was very similar to a game he played against Skilla. I don't think it was the Ghost River map necessarily, but he had already showed a game like that yesterday. So it's one of those things where, you know, yes, you only have a certain number of builds in a matchup. There's a lot of PvPs. There's a lot of tape on both these players. And certainly what Harstem did in game one was not something I've seen from Harstem in, I don't think ever, actually, at least in the games that I've seen. But if you start to lean back into these play styles that are maybe slightly gimmicky, right? Quick third base, robo opener, that there's a reason we don't see this happening well, apparently we're going to see it happen every single game because there's a robo opener from Harstem once again. But for most Protoss players, we don't really see that happening. Well, there's generally a reason why, and if ShoWTimE's going to be aware of this from the start and kind of sees how it happened, because he saw it happen a bunch to Skillous yesterday, he's going to be that much more prepared to just deal with it.
Yeah, I am curious what Harstem thinks is going to be different this time around, because it is the same thing. It is that very, very quick third nexus. Again, very quickly scouted. So there's not much that ShoWTimE can do to change his build order, obviously. He still has Blink on the way. But, the technology resources are very similar. Robo versus Twilight Council, Immortal being built versus the Blink. And so the third nexus, again, doesn't come down that much later if ShoWTimE figures out that that's what he's doing. Now, if ShoWTimE is completely blind, then he is building more army units or maybe more technology, getting like a faster robo because he's worried it might be DTs or something. Well, that's much worse. But 30-second difference on the Nexus. I mean, that's definitely something. Just on the last game, it wasn't the end-all be-all. Hallucinations continuing to be pumped out, by the way. Do see a kind of attack from Harstem. A little poke, make units, blah. But, ShoWTimE has made units after his own third nexus, so I think Harstem knows this will not do anything.
Force fields, immortals, he is up in army supply a little bit.
Sure.
Maybe this is cope, I don't know, but he's gonna Harstem has been using his hallucinations for things other than hallucinated Phoenix more than anyone else. We've seen hallucinated warp prisms, like, thank you Harstem for proving my point. Hallucinated warp prisms, hallucinated immortals, stalkers we saw in game one. We saw hallucinated archons in game two. He's the type of guy that if he doesn't need to get up a ramp, he's gonna hallucinate 4 probes to just have map vision everywhere. He is so, I don't know, I don't want to say creative because TLO is on Rebellion and that's maybe a little bit trite, but he is so creative in how he uses these, uses hallucinations to try to find advantages. But Zombie Grub, we talked about this being the same game over and over again and maybe expecting a different result. That is Glaives on the way.
It is indeed. Glaives, I would say, often thought of associated with a true all-in, but I'm not sure it's quite correct call what's going to be happening in all-in. We do have +1 on the way, and there might be some potential after the attack to actually macro out of it, especially because Adepts can kill a bunch of probes, for instance, right? That's particularly what they're good at. But this is now, right now, most importantly, a question of does ShoWTimE figure this out? So the way that you're going to deal with Adepts as far as positioning goes and SimCity and blocking is going to be different than if it was just a bunch of charge lots coming down. And so far, the move out has been missed, although now being detected as ShoWTimE gets free reign into the natural. One pylon could depower 3 gateways and the +1. That'd be pretty nifty. But suddenly all the stalkers are not at home. Only sentries to defend. 1 shield battery done. More on the way, but now the natural of ShoWTimE is in danger. And well, I don't know what the sentries think they're going to do, but I don't know it's going to be a lot.
No, not really. And Adepts warping and defensively just don't do anything. The problem is on the other side, there has to be a recall, and I guess there was now, but Harstem, yeah, he can't reinforce all that easily. Stalkers try to get on top of the Warp Prism, but they're going to keep it. It's going to stay alive for now. Keeps an Immortal alive as well. And remember, yes, this got a lot of damage done. It did. It doesn't matter because the army can't defend at home. And yeah, Harstem loses some pylons. I think he'll trade the game for it, Zombie Grub.
Yeah, I think he's all right with that. I mean, clearly ShoWTimE just wasn't anticipating that timing of an attack. I mean, not only was it faster than last game, but it also was going to be Resident Glaives. So the funny thing is, we hardly even see those Adepts. There's 4 Adepts. He never got to the point where he makes a bajillion of them and then starts threatening the shade and trying to get the defensive position, defensive army out of position. Didn't even bother happening because the base trade, the pseudo base trade, really did favor him so much. Good decision making as well to go into the natural as opposed to third base. I mean, look, it was kind of obvious in that game, but just throwing it out there. He went to the third base and he spent time tearing down shield batteries in a Nexus, and maybe it gets a little wackier, but no, good decision to go into the natural. And now Harstem leads 2-1, putting ShoWTimE on his last life.
Yeah, it's kind of funny. You talk about that Adept play, and this is actually something. You talk about Harstem doing the same thing over again, or like showing what he did against Skillous. Skilless was going those glaive adepts like every single game. It was very much more of a thing where it seems like Harstem's kind of taking a page out of Skilless's book, which is really cool. But even if that had mattered, and defensive adepts against a bunch of stalkers don't do much of anything, it was really the probe pull that forced him back home in the counterattack. But ShoWTimE didn't get charged. He warped in a couple zealots, and I guess he maybe planned on it. But those adepts, yeah, you talk about not really seeing them. It's kind of one of those funny situations where Harstem is building up to counter a style that never existed in the game.
Well,
yeah.
yeah. I mean, if he had gotten to his own charge, it still would have been helpful. But then you do have that dynamic that I saw a couple of people really discussing as far as charges versus adepts from the previous PvPs. But then ideally, if you really figure out that that's what they're doing, there's some like 2-base all-ins that happen with the Resident Glaives. You can try and even get Archons, but also you can try and get a lot of SimCity. You can try and get a lot of cannons. But you'd have to want to, know that that is the composition, first of all, which is hard because Twilight Councils don't tell you what they're upgrading. And then also that the army was on its way. That is the number one problem in a StarCraft 2 game, is if you don't see the army on the way. That was your number one problem. You need to know when the army's on the way to get the defenses up correctly, but then in that type of game as well, to get those stalkers poking and prodding, to get that delayed, to get those immortals out their shields, blah, 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 blah. And that just did not happen. So turned really awkward, kind of one of those games I think that you just shake your head at because you really didn't give yourself the best possible chance since you didn't see the army attacking. And so you kind of maybe even push it to the side, and stay focused on what could be your last game of the tournament. But this guy is close to advancing. In the bottom left for Shopify Rebellion, he is Harstem.
And in the upper right, trying to make heads, tails, maybe heads and tails about what his opponent's doing. He's down 1, looking to send us to game 5. It's ShoWTimE.
So read the second game, I think, very well, and then was able to use what he had really well too. So didn't overmake stalkers, but then the stalkers still found a 4th nexus to get canceled. That was still pretty good. Third game he was setting up as responding to the direction that the Harstem was really pushing, that third base, and then wasn't necessarily expecting that particular attack. It is, again, difficult to do so, even with a bunch of hallucinations, to know exactly how much army they've already built, if you don't see the army, where the army is going, and what is going to be the warp in. Because it's 4 adepts now. Okay, maybe they built that to harass, and then they just brought them back home. Oh, shoot, now it's 12 adepts. Very different, but didn't even get to that point. And now ShoWTimE might just be changing things up really a lot. His probe is moving away from the pylon, but it is possible he's going to try and check some of the standard proxy positions of his opponent and then go back and build something. So that's exactly what he's doing. Yeah, he is going to be a little more aggressive. Harstem is scouting around. He really wants to see if there is something of a miss here, but so far not so good. And it is a robo, so absolutely some dedicated pressure coming up for ShoWTimE on his last life, putting all the chips on the table here.
Now, Zombie Girl, what's also super cool, by the way, and it's not really going to matter this game, I don't think. Maybe Harstem waffled about it, but we saw ShoWTimE go. He mined out, first of all, great scout here. He's going to see exactly what's happening. But ShoWTimE mined out the mineral wall on the north side, which means a probe can go through there, but also you can do some funny things. So when you're scouting this map, if you click your probe on the right side and it paths a certain way, you know your opponent's mined out the wall, even without having seen it. Just that's how StarCraft pathing works. So what we see Protoss players do occasionally is they do something like that. They try to convince, say, Harstem, that I've proxied something on the right side of the map. On this island, you got to go really check it out. And maybe that was going to hide the proxy, but I get either Harstem didn't click there or he didn't. He said, that's a bait. I'm not dealing with that. Regardless, he now knows that there's a proxy robo on the map. He's got a robo of his own on the way. Sentries are done. And ShoWTimE, despite everything, I don't know if he's going to proxy something like a Stargate, do something really weird on the bottom right side because he's been scouted. We've seen weirder things. But he is just checking. He's like, look, I've proxied, but I really want to make sure, Harstem, that you're now proxying as well.
Yeah, they actually, well, obviously Harstem knows what's going on right now, but neither one of them probe scouted their mains. So that's a little bit of an oddity for PvP, but it does occasionally happen. It has worked out very well for Harstem, but not so much for ShoWTimE, who I mean, actually wasn't even rushing into a similar build. You know, Harstem got a Nexus and still has fallen flat on his face. Harstem, with the force field trap, has already nipped this in the bud, it feels like. I mean, ShoWTimE has got to dedicate to this. His Nexus is way too late, so he's going to try and figure out something to do here. But that is a catastrophic loss of life. Now you're down to just 3 units in the Warp Prism. All right, let's see what we can do.
He wants to force field the natural ramp, I think, but I mean, it's Immortal versus... Technically, this Immortal for Harstem is infinitely worse than the Immortal of ShoWTimE, so that is a bit of a problem here. Just gonna get chased down, and the force field on the ramp is nice. This is a great start. If you're able to knock the Immortal down, you're able to make this happen with a really nice hot pick on Micro. That does make a big deal. So probes are starting to go down. This is annoying. Harstem did take some damage. That Immortal falling doesn't feel great. But even despite that, this army from Harstem right now is so much better. Now that his prism's out, force field doesn't matter anymore. You can elevate her around. The combat sentry drop zombie grub. Like, I know the new sentries are good. 4 sentries in a prism, are they that good?
I mean, there's something, right? There's something. But yeah, now the lack of Immortal is concerning as ShoWTimE gets to his 2 Immortals and is even working on a 3rd. Now they're coming from downtown, so it's not the quickest form of aggression. And actually, I mean, playing a dangerous game here, but if he does get everything elevated up, then that is really bad news for Harstem. Doesn't have a shield battery in his main. Robo only powered by 1 pylon. A little bit tricky should that happen, but his Immortal does pop. He does take his high ground, and ShoWTimE is going to try and bust through that natural. That shield battery, it's there, but it's also pretty vulnerable, and it's only one of them. Force field for both players coming down. 1 Immortal still packing a punch for ShoWTimE, and the rest of them actually finally getting on the action too. And it's like, what does Harstem really have that's really firing, that's really damaging the units? Not too much. Is make sure the Warp Prism pick up. But now the rest of the army is here, and Harstem will hold the natural.
Well, Zombie Grub, the problem as well, you talk about what does Harstem have? A lot less than he should have. He was supply blocked. He's still supply blocked at 62. He killed some of his own probes to try to make sure he could survive. And he is, I guess he's so broke right now. He's so intent on making this happen that he can't build pylons. And now the army of ShoWTimE is so much bigger, even with overcharge. It's 4 Immortals to 1. This looks so good for the captain. But at the end of the day, that massive supply block is gonna mean that Harstem is way dead in this game. Yeah, maybe ShoWTimE gets forced back for half a second on the overcharge, but look at this. 38 army supplied at 24. Harstem losing all of his probes. 1 Immortal versus 4. No overcharge available. Massive supply block from Harstem altogether means that ShoWTimE seconds away from sending us to game 5.
Well, the second Immortal pops out. We got the Warp Prism powering the shield battery, but didn't pick up the Immortal. Should be able to pick up the second one. It is still going to be ShoWTimE victory. Harstem, had he had a couple of more units, had he actually maybe not been force-footed out, I think would have done the hold. But yeah, it is just way too much firepower with 4 Immortals. I mean, ShoWTimE was really packing a punch. Harstem just wasn't, you know? It's like Harstem's shield batteries were really doing a great job trying to make his army look invulnerable. But then ShoWTimE's army also kind of looked invulnerable because there just wasn't a lot of damage dealers from Harstem. Not even, you know, focus firing from Harstem would have done a lot with the units that he often had. So we will have a return to a tied series thanks to the good old 3-gate Robo. That's the oldie but goodie, and hasn't changed apparently with any of the changes to Protoss.
Well, maybe they're making a couple more sentries, but yeah, no, man, if Harstem just doesn't, he's at 62 for 62, and you look at the post-game lobby, and it's like, well, Harstem supply block for 30 seconds, ShoWTimE for a minute and a half. All that supply block for Harstem was the last 30 seconds of the game, when all of a sudden, maybe it was over by then. 4 Immortals versus 1, losing that first Immortal feels pretty rough. Harstem, he had a lot of empty time on that Robo. When he lost the first one, there was nothing in Robo production for quite a while. So, you know, maybe you can say even before then, it was a really rough spot, despite how nice that opening was. Totally annihilating the first gateway pressure. Regardless, supply blocking yourself, having to kill probes to get an Immortal out is not how you win the video game.
I'm so glad Harstem is typing this in chat because I felt a little crazy. I was like, those stalkers in the early game, that was terrible. That would, like, I feel like in a ladder game, some Protoss would be like, well, just kidding. Like, all right, see you next game. But no, like, ShoWTimE still won. So Harstem is saying in chat, I can't believe you won that game after losing 3 units. So I'm glad he agrees. That feels kind of absurd. I mean, even though the sentry trick is always clever and it finds some value, it's usually not enough to make up for that much loss of life when Protoss are all about, retention of units, not having a lot of them. But Harstem, as you were pointing out, did have some mechanical difficulties that I think were definitely problematic at the time that they happened, as well as being on the defender side versus the attacker side. And so you're bringing up the supply block, and I would also really emphasize that time where the Robo wasn't doing anything that you're talking about. He was microing his Warp Prism, and so he had actually still had like some Chrono on the Robo too, and had the minerals and gas, I believe. I'm pretty sure I looked, and he didn't have an Immortal in production. And so that sucks that it feels like, that was like 5 seconds. Did that really kill me? That wasn't the only thing that killed him, but you look back at that and you're like, oh man, if it was 5 seconds faster, then I have 2 immortals in the place, and then this doesn't get killed, and that doesn't snowball. But nope, didn't happen. And ShoWTimE has asked for 2 minutes, by the way, so we'll just be going over the last game for a while here as we wait for Oceanborn to get started.
Yeah, so now that we don't have to wait that much longer. Countdown's getting started. As we talk about this, right, we've had a 3-gate Robo worked out, although it probably shouldn't have. I think Harstem probably wins that at least 90% of the time if the opening is as good as it was. But we had some macro games. We had one aggressive game from each player that won. Some macro games tied out 1 apiece, same way. Oceanborn, game 5, you win here, you move on. Top 6, you lose, you're totally out of the tournament. It's a bigger map. Do we see one of those longer games? Does someone have the cojones to go and do something crazy on one base?
I think they absolutely both could. But it's what they're feeling is going to work out. Oceanborn for the final battleground. Top left for the Rebellion. He is Harstem.
And the bottom right in the red. Falling down, but not out of it. That 3-gate Robo worked magic for big. It's ShoWTimE.
And it often does. There's a reason that it is still a goodie, and that is that it's very powerful, and that it can still work after it's been scouted, and that it can even work when the opponent has the knowledge of how to deal with it and the setup to deal with it. Sometimes they're lacking. They admit they have a problem against that build, and so they can never win against it. That's happened before. Or they don't know, so they don't have the proper tools to defend against it, and that's fair. It's going to win. But sometimes, even when they have everything, knowledge and power, they still mess up against it because it can be so tricky. And I would say that is what happened last game. Harstem knew it was on the way. He got that scout very early on. He had the appropriate defense right off the bat. And yet somehow things still went just wrong enough as far as his macro, maybe, tiny little things that do add up. And as far as ShoWTimE's decision making, as far as his aggressiveness, what he did with the units, even after he lost so many, yeah, it still makes it work. So it's a very obnoxious thing, right? Those are the games that everyone loses occasionally, and you're just like, it's a bullshit build. Excuse my French, but that's what you think. And it's just the way of life. The way of PvP. PvP has a lot of obnoxious things. Protoss players will definitely be able to talk about it more. But if you're going to say the build is obnoxious, or the matchup is obnoxious, you might as well also be obnoxious. You throw that in there.
Zamogrub, have you heard of Eric Fire, the young Frenchman who made, who was one of the best Protoss players in Europe by 3-gate Roboing literally every single game. So look, if he can do it, ShoWTimE, he can whip it out in a game 4 and make it happen. But I'm really curious again about this game 5. It's going to be an adept opening from ShoWTimE. It's going to be something more middle of the road for Harstem, Stalker Sentry. Make sure you get that hallucination. And a Stargate opener for ShoWTimE. We saw this in game 1, Zombie Grub. Didn't work out for him all that well.
Yeah, we got some bookends going through here, right? But the rest of the series did occur. And so perhaps reading into the other 3 games that happened, he is thinking that this could be a powerful opener. Now, I don't know if he's doing this. I don't really want to bother thinking through if this could have been good versus the Fast Third Nexus, right? Because presumably Harstem isn't going to do that. We'll pay attention, though. But it is something that does give you a lot of scouting in the early game and a lot of potential in the early game. Those oracles can do a lot. They didn't in the first game, and they didn't help out in the defense either, which was really the most problematic thing, but it can be a very good opener. Now, Harstem is doing the exact same thing he did in the first game as well. So he sees the Adept opener. He figures it's Stargate, I guess, because he didn't actually get the pure scout on it. But he sends that probe across and builds a proxy pylon. So this is seemingly just the reaction to seeing the Adept openers, which, by the way, now it's 4. And they will grab a sentry. Yeah, 1 sentry goes down. 2 Adepts will also fall, but... Okay, 3 Adepts will fall. Maybe not worth that sentry kill. But I'm thinking more and more about that problematic pylon. It seems like ShoWTimE is as well. Actually just building a stasis trap right off the bat instead of going for the scout, instead of going for the pulsar beam on the probes. Barely doesn't count the pylon though, but he sees the army incoming and knows that this is going to be the aggression. Stasis trap takes out the stalkers immediately. Excellent start here for ShoWTimE, but will it go the way of last game as it did for Harstem, which is like, excellent start, but you still lose.
Yeah,
and he is now losing his own units.
I was gonna say, yeah, you look, okay, you get the stalkers, that means the sentries are vulnerable, but with stalkers warping in as well, I mean, yeah, sure, you knock 3 out. You still lose everything. Now, there is a shield battery done. That's a big difference from game number 1. Harstem was able to knock that first shield battery down before it really completed.
Oh.
It bought a lot of time.
Yeah.
But for now, okay, the other problem here, oracles were brought back in game number 1, right? They tried to fight, they just didn't do anything. This is maybe 1 tap. That stalker's dead. Second one, you're gonna have to run away for the time being. But ShoWTimE sent the oracles on the other side. He represents damage on the other side of the map because, well, realistically, stalkers against a bunch of oracles, well, the oracles just die. So you force a recall here, and this attack is stymied. ShoWTimE handles this so much better than game 1.
Yes, exactly. And a lot of it has to do with that shield battery actually finishing. So while the stasis trap didn't work out perfectly because he did lose his own units to the reinforcements, it still bought all that time. Harstem couldn't just collect his units and suddenly, bam, here I am, targeting down your shield battery. So the shield battery finishes, keeps the stalker alive for an extra few shots. That's still a huge difference. That still means that a couple more stalkers get warped in to accompany that remaining stalker. What also happened was that the probes were actually allowed down the ramp, so they could have also been used to pull in, and when it's a very low stalker versus stalker battles, probes are amazing, especially with the shield batteries up and running. So it looked a little dicey for a hot second there. It looked like maybe ShoWTimE still didn't have enough firepower, but he does hold on without the Oracle's help and does force that recall. As you said, it will stop the attack. But one Oracle did die, so that kind of takes away the potential probe killing power of the Oracle opener. You, in this game, now have Revelation and Stasis Trap. Big difference from the first one, which the first game was already over at this point.
I still kind of like Harstem's position in this game, though. If you look at look at what he's killed, he's generally killed more valuable things, but also his blink is a lot faster. That may allow him, I was going to say, get his third base a little faster, but it looks for now ShoWTimE's going to be a little bit further ahead on that. But it's going to be a Dark Shrine follow-up, and against, well, there's no Robo for ShoWTimE. There's a single Oracle on the map. If you get a good Revelation, it's not going to get a lot done for the first DT. But if you say for Stasis Traps, the Oracle dives down to the other side, or they both... Welcome to Game 5, Low End Bracket PvP. Simon Grubb, who knows what's happening?
But they're both such good ideas, right? And I actually said that this might have been a possibility, I think, of that first game. You know, it wasn't Harstem was just going to complete the game with a follow-up attack, but I was like, well, there also could be a problem. The Oracles were dead. Dark Shrine could have been an issue. And now they're both doing it. So Harstem only has one Oracle to worry about. You split up your DTs, boom, still damage done. ShoWTimE figures that this guy doesn't have anything. There's possibility that he skipped the Robo. My Oracle actually might have scouted that he skipped the Robo for this long. So he's only working off of that Twilight Council. And so I might be able to sneak in some DTs. So they both make sense. And now it is a question of who manages to get the better defense of the DTs, because things are going to get really chaotic very soon. Assuming the Oracle is alive, ShoWTimE has that slightly stronger chance of surviving. Come on now. But the Robo is on the way for Harstem as well. We'll see if he pumps out the Observer first and foremost.
Yeah, I was going to say, it's worth hallucinating for this. There is no detection on the map for ShoWTimE right now. He has no idea of detection on the map right now. And he seems to know he's in kind of a rough spot. DT is warping in. He's proxying a base. Okay, DT doesn't warp in, but he's proxying a base on the upper right side. It's like, this game's getting weird. I got to make sure I have something. And there's going to be an observer out for Harstem. Harstem, he shouldn't take any damage for these DTs. And against ShoWTimE, he's got a Forge on the way. Zombie Grub, that's just about it. And Forge not done yet. Cannon, it's going to take a while.
Well, Harstem, where is his DT? It's going to pass through the middle. Okay, so that is going to do some damage, yeah, for sure. But then the question is also where the Observer is for Harstem. And that is tracking a DT at this point. and he does handle things really well. Okay, yeah, that is just good news for Harstem, whereas ShoWTimE is absolutely going to take some more probe damage. The Oracle still yet to start, no detection otherwise. And actually, he'll just tap out. All right, that is game. Figures that he...